Good afternoon. This is a recorded a video on the lecture for our last class for this semester, which is on globalization, nation state, and also emerging political communities. All right, so we start now. Let me share the screen now. Okay. All right. So globalization and first of all, models of ethnic relation. By the way, there are two learning units in this particular lecture for today. The first one is on globalization and models of ethnic relations. And then later on, we'll look at the issue of nation states and also communities, emerging communities, Okay, so let us recall a bit on what ethnicity is about. So ethnicity is it refers to the cultural practices as well as outlooks of a given community of people, which set them apart from each other. So in other words, members of ethnic groups will see themselves as culturally different or distinct from other groups in society. For example, in terms of language, in terms of their religions and the styles of dress, or even food. There's some particular food which are unique to a particular ethnic group, for example. Okay, so all right, so globalization also can lead to heterogeneity. For example, in the United States, the American Indians, who were the original people of population, now make up less than 1% of the population as a whole in the US. So in other words, the Europeans were the first immigrants into North America in the 15th century, and that was followed by the slaves from Africa, and then later on people from Asia, and also recently from Latin America, who migrated to America. And for example, in 1848, the Latin American, where the US, for example, annexed a large chunk of Mexico, part of originally of Mexico, now become the state of New Mexico, in the US. Okay, so the same thing is also happening in Europe as well, where migrants or immigrants are coming from which was formerly Eastern European countries, for example, Turkey, Greece, Africa, as well as Asia. So so many people of different origins are coming to Europe. In Britain, for example, immigrants come from former colonies as well. Example from the Caribbean, from African states, from India, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh, and also Chinese and other Asians, who comes to Britain, who, in other words, who migrated to Britain as well. Right, so immigrants in this era of globalization has also accelerated and could be legal as well as illegal. Some migrants are legal, some are not. Right? So in other words, what we're saying is that the United States and Europe are all becoming increasingly heterogeneous or ethnically heterogeneous. So many kinds of people living in the United States as well as in Europe. Okay. Right. So ethnic heterogeneity here basically was a direct consequence of also a direct consequence of colonial policies, of either moving peoples or drawing people and redrawing drawing and also redrawing boundaries and making new boundaries and so on. Yeah. And so in later cases, yeah, different peoples forming distinct tribes, linguistic or ethnic communities that have never lived, yeah, under a single polity before, were put into new all-embracing political units. Right, so that suddenly we have new political units, yeah, and most of the colonies were put together on the map to suit the imperial interests of the Western powers. Okay, so that's under colonization. And a few could be described as resembling historical nations, yeah, and certainly not with the kind of borders that were being drawn as well. For example, the British India, which are partitioned into India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, what was used to be British India. Yeah, and for the Netherlands, East Indies, and in our part of the world, for example, the British Malaya, also a form of political units. Yeah, the islands of Borneo partitioned into 3 countries. Okay, Indonesia, Brunei, and Malaysia. Yeah. So British Malaya, for example, was kind of mapping or map drawing that took place. So that has taken place right there. It was not until 1965 that the final boundaries of Malaysia was settled, and even then we could see also that Sabah was claimed by the Philippines for many years after independence. So, okay, so in Southeast Asia, there has been the movement of people in this region for thousands of years. Right. So, for example, in Southeast Asia, it is good to contrast the, for example, the close inland agrarian polities with those of the open ports and seas. Yeah. So the inland people are doing agriculture, while as those in the ports and all that doing trading. Yeah. So the former tend to be conservative, now those inland tend to be more conservative and resistant to change because they were less open to foreign trade. Okay. So for example, those in the mainland Southeast Asia, including Vietnam and Laos. Okay. So on the other hand, we have many Southeast Asian coastal and as well as riverine societies as well. And these were plural in character. Plural meaning the populations several made of several kinds of people, yeah, even prior to colonization or colonialism, sorry. Yeah. And that is associated with the trade. And some people who were doing trading, they settled down and married local people and so on. Yeah. The pluralistic character of a lot of these societies in the coastal or riverine area actually increased increased during the colonial period without great opposition nor social trauma. Yeah? So these polities, state or civil government, were predisposed by their geography and history to accept cultural pluralism, yeah, particularly in their trading ports. Now, examples, we have a few examples actually. The Hindu-Buddhist ideas, for example, reached the port towns first, and the people were receptive to the new ideas and found that they kind of fitted well with the local needs, yeah, with the local needs. All right, so the coastal trading ports were therefore open and welcome outsiders, while the inland, yeah, and the royal sacred cities in the interior, for example, were very inward-looking. Yeah, inward-looking. For example, the Khmer Empire in Cambodia, they look towards the royal power and the culture of that center, yeah, compared to those who are in the riverine and also coastal areas. Yeah. The seaports, on the other hand, look both ways. In other words, they will look inward to the markets and also the production centers, yeah, and also outward to the open seaways as well. Yeah. So therefore, they acted as gateways for new products, new technology and ideas, and offered markets and homes to a great variety of peoples. Yeah, heterogeneous, yeah, population. In other words. Okay, so so the ethnic as well as the cultural differences were accommodated, in other words, were accepted. Yeah, and these coastal seaports were not controlled by the inland state or by the royal, yeah, or the rulers, and were effectively independent and more or less self-governing. Yeah, and these coastal towns, for example, were good examples of where there are cultural pluralism, sorry, in the traditional milieu, and were open to alien influences. In other words, they are more easily influenced by foreign agents, for example. Yeah. What are examples in Malaysia as far as this is concerned? Cultural pluralism. I'm quite sure there are places in the past which are more prone to cultural pluralism. I think, for example, we have Malacca, Penang, etc. Yeah, Malacca. You know the history behind Malacca, and also Penang as well, right? The British time, and also Malacca even earlier than that. Yeah. The Portuguese coming to Malacca and so on, yeah. So that and also the trading that took place, yeah, from the east and also from the west as well. Okay, so now we move on to models of development of ethnic relations. Okay, how does, yeah, ethnic relations develop? In other words, yeah. First of all, we look at the first one. The first model is through assimilation. And the second one is what is known as pluralism, or more specifically known as the cultural pluralism. And the third one is multiculturalism. Right? So let's look at the first model. Okay. First one is assimilation, which means that this is where new immigrants, for example, new people who come into the area, yeah, adopt the attitudes and language of the dominant local community, right? So they assimilate themselves, yeah, both in terms of the attitudes as well as the language of the local people. So, for example, in the 1950s, the dominant models for nationhood were to be found in the Western Europe. Yeah. So it was assumed that at that time that the ideal nation would have to be united by a single language, by a single religion, and also culture. So ultimately, there would be one national ethos. Yeah, one national ethos. So if a country also, for example, enjoy a shared history, it would make things easier. Yeah, it makes things easier for the government to manage, for example. Yeah. So the longer the shared history, the better it is. And if they did not have a long shared history, then the process of nation building may have to follow the example of the United States, for example. Yeah, where national unity through assimilation and also assimilation by conscious educational effort. Ya, itu yang berlaku di United States. Okay, so the concept of nation state led to another concept, that of assimilation. Right, so assimilation. For example, it was thought that the idea or the ideal nation state was through national melting pot. Melting pot is satu konsep ya, which meant that the total assimilation of the minorities to enable them to resemble the majority people. Now, I've shown some pictures here of the American concept of assimilation as a melting pot. Yeah, some Chinese, Irish, Italian, Mexican, Russian, and so on. Yeah, come together and and melt in a pot. In other words, yeah, that's the concept of melting pot. Yeah. So through assimilation, people would be able to think and feel as a nation, ya, sebagai satu negara, ya, satu buah negara. So it was hope, yeah, without even knowing how, the minority groups would enrich the core national culture when it finally emerged. In other words, the minority groups will become part of the majority people culturally, yeah, culturally. So we could see, for example, the American culture is that of each individual ethnic culture. Okay, so however, the theory of melting pot has been criticized, yeah, has long been criticized because it has been argued that such a Euro-American model, it is more or less like a European-American model. This kind of model cannot be applied to our region, for example, our Southeast Asian region. It doesn't work. Yeah. For example, the Malay archipelago was part of a unique borderless maritime world where people were mobile and migratory. So people have been moving around, yeah, from one place to another along the coast. So it was a world of trade over long distances and continuously for centuries, yeah, amongst the neighboring peoples of Asia. Yeah. So assimilationist goals where minority groups would disappear and become part of the majority were rather alien ataupun unknown to the region in the Southeast Asia area. Right. So the British administrators, unfortunately, thought that this crude idea of melting pot tadi would work because their view of Malayan history was that of individual Malay states and also the history of Malaya under British rule. Yeah. So by studying history narrowly, so narrow in a way, yeah, they forget the larger historical reality of the multicultural nature of Asian societies. Cannot. I mean, there's so much differences between the different region, different countries in Asia that you can possibly, yeah, group them or melt them into one single culture. Right. So slowly, these theories of assimilation were discredited as new debates opened up on race and ethnicity in the United States as well. Yeah. So this have more or less a powerful effect on social science research elsewhere, and many scholars shifted their emphasis on cultural pluralism and multiculturalism rather than the theory ataupun model of assimilation tadi. Yeah. Okay. In Malaysia, however, the response to this new concept was a bit slow. Yeah, a bit slow. But when non-governmental organization ataupun NGOs raised the issue of indigenous minority rights to that of human rights, the concept of multiculturalism took off and began to be accepted. Yeah. So, for example, people in Sabah and Sarawak, yeah, regarding the rights of the minority, the indigenous people. Okay. So then come a new concept, quite different from the melting pot punya concept tadi. Yeah. The salad bowl or umbrella. Is it umbrella or is it salad bowl? Yeah. So in some countries, such as America and Australia, it is less of a salad bowl, but the analogy of an umbrella is better, yeah, in the context of America and Australia. The judicial and legal framework, the schools are that the white people, yeah, are that of the white people, but under it, many ethnic minorities are also accommodated as well. Right, so it's an umbrella concept rather than a salad bowl. In Malaysia and Sarawak, in particular, this is more appropriate. Yeah, the salad bowl analogy is more appropriate for the Malaysian context and also Sarawak context. For example, in Sarawak, there is a tripartite judicial system, which include the Sharia court for Muslims. Then there is the Adat Istiadat or native courts for some judicial aspects of the non-Muslim natives. Yeah, for example, dealing with land disputes, marriage issues, divorce, and also minor offenses as well, which are dealt with in the Adat system, yeah, or native courts rather than the civil court. And yeah, and then of course we do have the civil court for criminal matters. So in other words, there is some kind of a mix, but at the same time they are separated. Yeah, we have one country, one nation with several systems which coexist, coexistence of several systems. So the educational system too has accommodated the different ethnic communities to be found in Malaysia. For example, we have the national type school as well as the vernacular schools. Yeah, for example, the Chinese and Tamil. All right, so there is certain amount of accommodation, yeah, going on, yeah, in the country, yeah, accommodate the differences in culture. All right, so that's for assimilation, and there is, as I said, ada kebetulan dan juga isu assimilation itu lebih kepada a salad bowl punya konsep rather than the melting pot seperti yang dijangkakan di Amerika Serikat. Right, the cultural pluralism is the second model for ethnic relations in Malaysia, particularly, yeah, and also in many parts of Asian societies as well. Okay, so pluralism is a second model of development of ethnic relation in a nation where many groups exist separately, and they participate in the economic as well as the political life. Yeah. As you can see, for example, in Malaysia, we have several ethnic groups that coexist. Yeah, and we participate in the economic as well as in politics as well. So cultural pluralism, yeah, means public acceptance and tolerance of ethnic minorities by the dominant majority population in the country. For example, in Malaysia, the majority population is Malay, and the others are um, Chinese, Indians, and other ethnic communities, yeah, in Sabah, Sarawak as well. Yeah. So in other words, what you're saying is that the different ethnic identities are accepted as equally valid within the context of the overall national culture. Overall national culture. Okay. So increasingly, what we observe is that pluralism is emphasized in the ethnic relations in Malaysia. So we practice pluralism. We, in other words, we accept the different cultures, yeah, in our society. Yeah. Example, from the 12th to 19th centuries, for example, Muslim traders spread new cultural layers to many ports, and Chinese trading activities were also quite extensive. Yeah, so the trader community yang berdagang ni lah, included travelers, merchants coming and going, yeah, and using port as bases for their long distance trade. Resident agents who often married locals and merged with the local elites. Jadi itu yang berlaku. Berdagang, sometimes some of them stop and even settle down to get married with the local people as well. Okay. So it is therefore kind of difficult to speak of a true Malayness, or a true Chineseness, yeah, which is from a timeless past, actually. So we can see from in Malacca, for example, we have Chinese of origin who practice, who rather kind of adopt local culture and so on, yeah. And so it's also true for the certain other group as well, yeah. So it's not quite easy, yeah, to speak of true Malayness ataupun true Chineseness, because of the history of trading, especially among the coastal region, ports, and so on. Yeah. So this enclaves or group of people with different or distinct cultures, they survive. Yeah, they survive because they supported the local rulers' interests. Yeah? They supported the local rulers' interests. Okay, so right. Okay, so that is cultural pluralism. The third approach ataupun cara yang ketiga, model ataupun teori of ethnic relations ini adalah which is quite similar to the pluralism, but it's even better actually, yeah, in terms of in the context of Malaysia, yeah, the multiculturalism, yeah, multiculturalism. In other words, the definition of multicultural is something that incorporates ideas, it incorporates beliefs of people from many different countries and cultural backgrounds. So this is practiced in modern ethnic Malaysia. And if you look at the definition of multicultural, it can be defined as all for having to do with the various cultures. Yeah, as you can see from the pictures I show you on the right side of your screen. Yeah. Ataupun defined as of or having to do with or advocating multiculturalism. Okay, so multiculturalism is the way in which society deals with cultural diversity, both at the national and at the community level. So sociologically, multiculturalism assumes that society as a whole benefits from the increased diversity through the harmonious coexistence of different cultures. Yeah. So that keyword, yeah? Increasing diversity through harmonious coexistence of different cultures. And by the way, those of you who are joining me, this is not supposed to be an online class. Yeah? This is a record of a lecture for this afternoon's class. As I mentioned earlier on, the class is cancelled due to the directive from the university. Yeah. So if you are following me, that's okay. You can listen to me till the end, but it is not necessary. I'm going to upload the lecture, the video later on. Okay, back to multiculturalism. So multiculturalism actually can take place on a nationwide scale or within the nation's communities. Yeah, for example, within a state. Right. So it can be, for example, within Malaysia, within Sarawak, within Sabah, and so on. So proponents of multiculturalism believe that people should retain at least some features of their traditional cultures. So that's exactly what is happening in Malaysia. Yeah, we have the Malay culture, we have the Chinese culture, we have the Iban culture, we have the what do you call this? Kadazan, you know, and so on and so forth, the Indians, etc., etc. Yeah. All right. So still retain at least some features of their traditional culture. So multiculturalism typically develops according to one of two theories, that is either it is melting pot theory or the salad bowl theory. Yeah. So it can be any one of those. Yeah. Okay. So going back to the the melting pot theory, which I visited earlier on. The melting pot theory of multiculturalism assumes that the various immigrants groups will tend to melt together. Yeah, it's just like putting all the ingredients inside a pot, yeah, a cooking pot, and so melt together, thus abandoning their individual cultures. So individual cultures are forgotten or left behind, and eventually becoming fully assimilated into the predominant society. That's the concept of melting pot. Yeah. So typically, this is used to describe the assimilation of immigrants into the United States of America. Okay. On the other hand, we have the salad bowl theory. The salad bowl theory is a little bit more liberal theory of multiculturalism in that compared to the melting pot theory. Yeah, the salad bowl theory described the heterogeneous society. Yeah, where I mean various groups, various ethnic group, for example, in a society in which they coexist, but retain at least some of their unique culture or unique characteristics of their traditional culture. So it is very much like a salad ingredients. If you had, eaten or prepared salad, that's how it is, where different cultures are brought together, but rather rather than mixing them into a single homogeneous culture, they retain their own distinct flavors or distinct cultural traditional culture. So, in other words, the salad bowl theory asserts that it is not necessary for people to give up their heritage, cultural heritage, in order for them to be considered as members of the dominant society. Yeah. So, example, the different ethnic groups in Malaysia, each one can maintain their own cultural heritage and identity, but all of them, regardless of their ethnic background, all of them are Malaysians. Yeah, all of them are Malaysians. Okay. All right. L-Utane, nation states and other emerging communities. Okay. So what is nationalism? By the way, you probably have heard about this many times in the past. It is a word or concept which is derived from the concept of nation state. Actually, yeah, there's nationalism is derived from the concept of nation state. However, the word nationalism sometimes has negative connotations. Yeah, for example, following the Second World War, there is the some form of aggressiveness, yeah, aggressive form of nationalism under the Nazi Germany, and also in our part of the world, more or less, the Imperial Japan. Yeah, remember the Japanese occupation during this time. Yeah, so that is the negative connotations of the nationalism. Yeah, in developing countries, the word nationalism has often been seen as positive, yeah, which closely associated with patriotism, yeah, patriotism, with national pride, with dignity, and also self-respect, yeah, as well as to the sacred task of saving and protecting the country from imperialism. Okay, so jadi ada negative and also positive connotations of the term or the word nationalism. So dalam bahasa Melayu, ianya sama dengan the word bangsa ataupun kebangsaan, ya, the same with the word in Malay words, ya, bangsa ataupun kebangsaan. Okay, so in the anti-colonial period, yeah, cries for independence, for example, people were trying to get away from colonial powers and so on. Yeah, there was implicit acceptance that the imperial power would be replaced by a new nation state. Yeah, colonial state being replaced by a nation state, with its own positive as well as beneficial form of nationalism. Yeah, nationalism. But as we have seen also earlier on, that many countries in Southeast Asia, there are multicultural, multi-ethnic, and so on. Yeah, so no nation in Southeast Asia can claim to be culturally homogeneous. Yeah. Unlike the Japanese, for example. We just assume the Japanese are more homogeneous compared to other countries, for example. So everywhere there is evidence of cultural diversity, right? In almost every countries in Southeast Asia, and for countries which are more homogeneous, like Vietnam or Laos, the problem of nation building is less, ataupun nation building was more straightforward lah, senang sikit kan untuk membentukkan satu bangsa ataupun nation state. However, in the context of British Malaya ketika dulu lah, it was a bit more problematic for obvious reason. Where the building of new nation out of peoples of different origins and of different cultures. Yeah, it was indeed a difficult challenge. Yeah, particularly for those who govern the country. Yeah. Okay, so what is a nation? Bagaimana what is the definition of a nation? Ya, mengikut seorang pengkaji atau penulis yang bernama Benedict Anderson, beliau mendefinisikan, defines a nation as an imagined political community, right? Imagined political community. How is that so? Well, it is imagined because members of the nation, even the smallest one, will never know most of their fellow members. And itu kan, never know most of the fellow members, or meet them, ya, tak pernah jumpa, or even hear of them, ya, tak pernah dengar pun. Yet in the minds of each lives the image of their communion. Jadi kita macam satu buah negara, satu state, ya, satu nation, ya, nation of Malaysia. We probably have never met each other, many, and then we don't know who the members are, and yet we consider ourselves as a nation, yeah, that we live, that each lives the image of the communion tadi. Okay, so it is imagined. That's why Benedict Anderson katakan itu merupakan satu imagination, ya, imagine political community. Okay, so in other words, a nation state or nation, exists when a significant number of people in the community imagine themselves to form a nation or behave as if they form one. Ya, imagine mereka itu membentukkan satu buah negara. So nationalism, yeah, by the way, nationalism is not the awakening ataupun kebangkitan of nations, yeah. It's not the awakening of nation to self-consciousness, but rather it invents nation where they do not exist, yeah. So nationalism itu satu bentuk maybe belief, yeah, some kind of imaginations that they invent a nation, yeah, yang mungkin tak pernah wujud, ya. Now, what are the characteristics of nation as an imagined community? Right, the three characteristics. Number one, a nation is limited in the sense that it is limited because even the largest of them is finite. In other words, there is a limit to a nation in terms of boundary, in terms of size, and so on. Yeah, so they have boundaries, even if it is elastic. Then beyond which lies other nation. Sebagai contoh, kita ada negara Malaysia dan di sebelah kita ada Thailand, ada apalagi Indonesia, Singapore, right? So we have boundaries. Okay, and also Brunei, for example, right? So no nation will imagine itself to be a nation of humankind, right? So there is limited. Yeah? And the other important thing about a nation, another characteristics of a nation, it is sovereign. Yeah? Sovereign meaning berdaulat. Yeah. So the imagined community is sovereign community. It is imagined as sovereign because it came of age in the period of enlightenment and also revolution, which destroyed the legitimacy of divine order ataupun hierarchical dynasty ketika dahulu. Ya. So nations often dream of being free, and it is this freedom which is the sovereign state. Jadi, kalau sebuah negara ditakluki oleh negara lain, maka negara tersebut tidak ada sovereignty. Right? So a state or nation must have this apa nama itu sovereign tadi ya, yang berdaulat ya, yang di apa nama governed by its people and so on ya, but not by other nations. Yang ketiganya adalah is that a nation is also a community. Yeah, it is an imagined as a community because regardless of the actual inequality ataupun whatever exploitation that may prevail in the state ataupun country, each nation is always conceived as a deep horizontal comradeship. Ya, satu community, in other words, ya, satu bangsa. Ya. So it is this kind of fraternity that makes it possible for millions of people to even willing to die for such a limited imagination tadi. Yeah, people are willing to die for the community, for the country, in other words. Okay, all right. So those are the three characteristics of a nation. Now let's look at the context of Malaysia. We have what is known as the Malaysian nation state, right? So it has been the aim of Malaysia to have a united Malaysian nation state ataupun bangsa Malaysia by the year 2020. That was supposed to have been achieved. Yeah. However, this has given rise to some debates among various groups or social groups with regard to the type of nation state that both Bumiputra and non-Bumiputra is trying to promote. Jadi ada sedikit keraguan ya tentang what kind of state, what kind of nation state do we want. Yeah. Now, for example, at the level of authority-defined social reality ataupun which is contextualized within the existing legal state ataupun bureaucratic state structures, such as the constitutions, ataupun pelembagaan, and the federalist nature of the state, which is in the case it is Bumiputra dominated. There is no issue in terms of national identity. No issue of in terms of national identity. So we have our identity is Malaysian, nation identity. The state privileges many aspects of Bumiputra culture as the core of the Malaysian national identity, while at the same time recognizing the cultural symbols of other ethnic groups as well. Right. So and also on the other hand, at the level of the everyday social reality, apa yang berlaku, every day in our life, the authority define the cultural principle as has been challenged by at least three groups. That is in reality, everyday life. Three groups have challenged that. One is the challenge by the Chinese or the non-Bumiputera group, led by the Chinese, and also by the non-Muslim Bumiputera group, which are led by the Kerazan of Sabah, and also the radical Islamic Bumiputera group led by the Islamic or the Party Islam in Kelantan. So what I'm saying is that there is some kind of questions raised with regard to the authority, define culture of Malaysian culture. So the non-Bumiputera groups, for example, they reject the Bumiputera base and Bumiputera defined culture, a cultural principle, in preference for a more pluralized position equal to that of the Bumiputera. Right? So they want to have that as well. And for example, the Chinese suggest that the Chinese language as well as rituals should be considered part of the national identity as well, not just the Bumiputera ataupun the Malayan national identity. On the other hand, the non-Muslim Bumiputera, particularly in Sabah, this group suggests that Christianity and also native religions should be accorded equal status to that of Islam. So the Kerazan of Sabah argue that for the non-Muslim, they good for the case of the non-Muslim Bumiputera. On the other hand, the radical Islamic, on the other hand, rejects the what they see as the secular or modernist Islamic identity in preference for truer and purer Islam, and hence the idea of an Islamic state. Jadi ada percanggahan ataupun perbezaan pendapat tentang national identity. All right, so that's the situation we have in Malaysia, and I think some of these are still not quite fully resolved yet. All right, so let's go to the next concept of nation state. So a nation state is defined by, of course, by its territory, by its people, and by its language, culture, symbols, and also institutions. So the idea must be shared. The idea of nation state must be shared by a number of people who perceive themselves as members of that nation, members of that particular nation, and who feels that it unites them. Right? So something that is shared. So, for example, a nation of intent is a nation state which is still under construction, masih dibuat, masih dibentuk, and promises the citizens an opportunity to participate in grand project, for example. So it therefore bridges two things. One is the authority defined and idea of a nation, and the everyday defined idea of a nation. Jadi yang seperti kita nampak tadi, ada yang which is the authority defined nation tadi, adalah agak berlainan dengan the everyday defined idea of a nation. Yeah, as we can see from the response from the three different groups in Malaysia tadi. Okay. So Tun Mahathir, for example, in the case of Malaysia, once admitted that the United Malaysian nation state is yet to be born, belum lagi dilahirkan sebenarnya. Ya, nampaknya belum tercapai lah, ya, according to Tun Mahathir. So the concept is not very different from the concept that was suggested by Anderson tadi, what is known as concept of emerging political community. Yeah, emerging political community. Yeah, just remember that in Anderson's emerging community, the community will never know most of their fellow members, meet them, or even hear them. Yet, in the minds of each, lives the image of their communion ataupun their community. Itu ya. In other words, there is this imagination. We don't know. We probably don't know each other. There's no way we can know every member of the community or the people in the state, for example. Yet we consider ourselves as bahagian daripada community tersebut. Ya. So Malaysia actually can be said to be one state, many nations. Right? One state, but many nations. Right? So the assimilationist tendencies of Bhumiputera define nation of intent tadi ataupun nation state tadi, called bangsa Malaysia, has been rejected by the non-Bhumiputera who prefer a pluralized nation where no one single community predominates. Right? Okay, so itu yang apa yang berlaku di Malaysia lah. Jadi isu berkenaan dengan the issue of nation state. Jadi some states where even if they are known to be sudah merupakan satu buah negara, especially the new ones, maybe masih lagi pada peringkat nation of intent, ya, masih lagi dalam construction, ya. The differences in the country may still exist, yeah, but this is something that need to be solved and resolved. For example, I think Indonesia also was facing the same thing at one time, that they have issue with nation state. They are even worse, I think, because of the size of the country and also spread over many part. Kita hanya ada 3 bahagian, ya. Kita ada Sabah, Sarawak, and also West Malaysia. But if you look at Indonesia, they are even more complex. So the issue of nation state bagi negara yang seperti itu mungkin satu yang agak rumit lah, ya, agak rumit bagi mereka. So anyway, itu saja yang saya nak sampaikan berkenaan dengan isu nation state, issue of nationalism, and it is very much tied to what I have discussed earlier on the issue of ethnic relations. How do we deal with the issue of ethnic relations within a country which is multi-ethnic, yeah, multicultural, yeah. For example, Malaysia and also other countries as well. Jadi proses-proses itu termasuk tadi ataupun model yang digunakan mungkin berbeza di antara negara-negara di dunia, ya, seperti saya katakan di US, United States, for example, they probably make use of melting pot punya model, but at the same time maybe it's more to umbrella punya model rather than the salad bowl punya model. Kita punya lebih kepada salad bowl punya teori, di mana we have so many different ingredients, different apa nama parts, vegetables dan sebagainya, put together inside a bowl and mix, ya, mix, and yet still we find each and every component tu boleh kita masih nampak lagi, ya, in other words, ya, even if they are mixed in a bowl, dibandingkan dengan melting pot. Ya, melting pot sebenarnya konsepnya adalah ianya at the end of the day there is only one apa nama culture, one culture, which has been assimilated and becomes part of the national culture, the United States culture ataupun American culture. But at the same time, I think even then in US also they recognize minorities, they recognize differences as well. Otherwise, they will not be able to cope with the ataupun masalah yang dihadapi di Amerika sekarang ini adalah because the blacks and also has been discriminated against. Sorry, not just the black, but also the non-white, for example, has been very much discriminated against, and we have seen this in recent events that occurred in those in the country recently. Ya. Jadi itu saja untuk hari ini. So with that, that's the end, and I wish you all the best in your final exam. So far, I have not heard anything about the schedule for the final exam. I will let you know when I find that out later on, yeah, from the coordinator. And another thing, also, if I may announce it here, is that we may have some quizzes, short quizzes later on along the way. All right, so I'm going to stop the recording now, yeah.